Happy Thursday. We're coming at you live on this Sunnyside Summer Thursday. This is the CHGO Blackhawks Podcast. Head to sunnyside.shop or the nearest Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary and use that code HICHGO for 35% off your first order. Bright buys every day, only for 21 plus or Illinois Med Card holders. And this is a special show. The CHGO Ranks content series is presented by Miller Lite. These are the top 10 Chicago Blackhawks games of all time as decided by us. There can be no arguing. There can be no disagreeing.
Definitive.
We have spoken.
Nope.
Tastes great.
Oh, nice job.
Less filling.
Spilled your Miller Lite.
Great. Less
I did.
filling.
I did spill my Miller Lite.
Not even one game into this.
We're
Just
fired up.
Started.
It's an exciting week here. If you've been following CHGO Sports on social media, as you should be, they've been revealing the top 25 over the course of the week, and our list does not influence their list. This is our special list that we came up with on our own, and they came up with their what do you call it? The
Ranks?
yeah, the
Ranks
group
week?
that chooses them.
It
the
was
ranking committee.
Yeah,
The ministry.
Exactly. Yeah, committee. It was a committee. Good
The
call.
ranking committee came up with their own, but we know more about the Blackhawks than them.
True.
So why don't we get right to it?
Yes.
Let's do it.
Do it.
Number 10.
Number 10.
Calgary comeback.
October 12th, 2009, the Blackhawks were down 5-0, 11:43 into the first period. The Blackhawks scored 5 straight times to force overtime, and Brent Seabrook, who I'm sure we'll be hearing from later in this show,
Many times on this show.
completes the comeback 26 seconds in overtime. This was another one of these arrival moments for this team. This is the 2010 season, the beginning of the 2010 Stanley Cup season. And when you look back on championship years for any sport, there's always a handful of regular season games that kind of like tell the tale that are very memorable. And this might be the top regular season game of that year.
It's that game that instilled the mindset of like no game is out of reach for that Blackhawks team. And they did it a few times in the postseason. We'll talk about some of those. And yeah, that run the year before was kind of like they got to the Western Conference Final when no one expected them to, and they probably did a year earlier than expected. But this game was the one that it was just like, you know what? It wasn't just a fluke. All those pieces were there in the right spot. Turned out to be a special season.
Yeah, I was at this game. It was back when I had the season tickets. This was just the 6th game of that season, so it was super early on, and it was just like, oh boy, this one's done. And then it was John Madden who scored late in the first period to get the Hawks on the board.
Oh,
But
sorry, wrong guy.
this showed the depth of that team. Not only like it showed you that the character of this team, you kind of felt something special was brewing. Never count them out, but it showed the depth because they got those 5 goals. There's 6 goals to win this game came from 6 different players. John Madden, Patrick Kane, Dustin Byfuglien, Dave Bolland, Patrick Sharp, and then Seabrook with the only overtime goal of his career, right? Never had another one?
I don't remember any others.
Okay.
By the way, and noteworthy too, as Mario talked about, they're coming off the Western Conference Final. People know that this team's going to be better, and the start of the season hadn't gone as smoothly as they thought. They lost 4-3 to the Panthers in overtime in the first game of the year in Finland. Then they beat them 4-0 the next day. Then they lose 3-2 at Detroit. Then they beat the Avalanche 4-3 in the shootout. So none of this super convincing. And then you're down 5-0 against the Flames, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What is going on with this team? And remember, this is not the 2024 Florida Panthers or Colorado Avalanche. They're different teams back then. And you're kind of like, oh, my God, now they're down 5-0 to Calgary. The start hasn't been as great as we had maybe hoped. and then that comeback happens, and they go on to win 2 more after that. That made it 4 in a row, and the rest is history. So they started really catching fire in November.
Yeah, and that was it was Cristobal Huet who started that game.
What? Shocking.
And gave up 3 goals on 5 shots before getting yanked.
Not wonderful.
And the Emmy came in and said, one of my favorite memories from this game was right after the Blackhawks tied the game in the second period. Troy Brouwer dropped the gloves with Jarome Iginla.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, that's not something you saw a lot out of Iginla, especially at that point. He was a little feisty early in his career. Right. But, man, when you saw, Troy Brouwer and Jarome Iginla duke it out, it was like, all right, this is maybe the most fun game I've ever been to. It was one of the most fun games I was ever at.
It was very fun to watch that one. And, again, just kind of one of those moments. All right, let's go to number 9. The Blackhawks win their first Stanley Cup on April 10th, 1934. Mush March, he scores the game-winning goal in double overtime, a 1-0 win over the Red Wings. March becomes the first player to score a cup-clinching goal in overtime. So I remember this game. I was there.
I was there, too.
I think Stuckey was there.
Yeah.
Law was there. Boy, full of memories. And
Harm was like beer vending.
Yeah, and Mush March, just a great game. That huge goal in double overtime.
Oh, if you look back at that picture, they're wearing those jerseys that they busted out for the Notre Dame Winter Classic. That was their first.
Stanley Cup looks a lot smaller.
Yes, a few less rings back then, but I mean, they had won the Stanley Cup that year, in which was their 6th year of existence.
1926.
7th year.
7th year, yeah.
They didn't have the greatest regular season that year, but back then you didn't have to be great. They went 20-17-11 in the regular season and won the Stanley Cup. So
the 1934 Cup, that's the one where it was like, aren't they the team that had like the worst point percentage?
I think that was that was the 38 team.
The 38 team. Okay.
That only won 14 games in the regular season and won the Stanley Cup.
Hey.
They had a 385.
The beauty of the original 6.
Exactly. Somebody's got to make the playoffs, and that team probably started the old adage of just got to get in, and anything can happen.
Yeah, exactly.
That was Charlie Gardner in goal for that team for the Blackhawks.
I believe he won the Vezina that year.
Went 6-1 in the playoffs, had a 133 goals against average, 2 shutouts in 8 playoff games, and was dead months later. Very sad. He died June 13th, 1934 at the age of 29.
If there was a Conn Smythe, if they gave out the Conn Smythe or the equivalent to that award in 1934, he definitely would have won it. He carried that team on his back.
Yes, he did. I believe it was I think he had an aneurysm or something. And I know he wasn't right during the Cup final, and people noticed some stuff about Gardner, and a couple months later he was gone.
It was like a brain tumor or something like that.
Yeah, brutal.
Sad.
All right, well, let's transition now.
A little happier. Yeah.
That is the 1961 Stanley Cup, their lone cup in 7 decades. The Hawks win their 3rd cup for the first time since 1938. Ab McDonald scores the game-winning goal in the second period. Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, Glenn Hall, and Pierre Plot all get their names on the cup, a 5-1 win over the Red Wings in 1961. So we were actually off the air. We just heard the Cubs guys talking about the 1969 team and how they're so beloved because it's Santo and Banks and Jenkins and Billy Williams and all these guys, but they never won. Right. That's what I think makes this one special, is all these icons of the Blackhawks franchise all have their name on the cup because of this cup win.
Yeah, and it's crazy too of how early in the careers of all those guys that it was. Like this for Mikita and Hall, like, they started their careers in the the late 50s, but that 1961 team, Mikita was 20. Mikita was 20. Bobby Hall would have been 22.
Yeah,
and then they went on to have all the success that they did in the 60s and into the 70s, but just this one was the cup year. They had other opportunities during that time, but this is the one that they got, and it was the one that Blackhawks fans for a long time hung their hat on.
That was it.
49 years it was.
Growing up, that was what my dad talked about all the time, that 61 team.
Yep.
And just look at the talent that was on that ice. So many Hall of Famers. The four we mentioned in the graphic, those all have their number retired by the Blackhawks. You know, Makita, Hall, Plott, Glenn Hall, Kenny Warren was in that game, Moose Vasco. Al Arbor, the legendary coach that won 4 straight cups with the Islanders, was a defenseman for the Blackhawks on that team. And even the Red Wings were full of Hall of Famers. Alex Delvecchio, Gordie Howe, Norm Ullman. They had a ton of talent on that team, but as we know, Detroit sucks, and they can't get the job done.
Yeah.
I mean, Blackhawks 2-0 all time in
Sucks to
Stanley
suck.
Cup Finals
Yeah.
against the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah.
Take that.
All right, why don't we?
Detroit sucks!
Yes, thank you.
Detroit sucks!
There he is, Jeremy.
Not
Piven.
the last time the Red Wings are all over this list.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you get when you have
And
such
they
a
suck.
storied rivalry.
Speaking of that, number 7 on the list, the first Blackhawks Winter Classic, January 1st, 2009. The Hawks actually lose this game 6-4, but it was all about, again, the arrival and the memories. The Hawks play in the Winter Classic at Wrigley. Christopher Stieg, Martin Havlat, and Ben Eager all score in the first period. Then the Red Wings go and score 5 straight goals. The Hawks are currently 1-5 in outdoor games, but that was just another one of those franchise arrival moments where you said, this team's next. They're very, very good. And back then, Detroit was a real juggernaut, a great team. And
They had just won the cup.
They were reigning Cup champions.
Right.
Marian Hossa was on the wrong side of
Yes,
that
he was.
game. But that probably was one of those games where he was like, oh, this team might be kind of good. And then
taking notes.
and he talked about,
Interesting.
and then these two teams met that year in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah. Yep.
But this was, despite the game, not ending the way they wanted it to, this was just such a special day. And, for someone who had gone through, the last decade of the Bill Wirtz era and watched them trade away Jeremy Roenick and Ed Belfour and Chris Chelios and get nothing in return and get to the point where nobody was paying any attention to them, and they literally had to pay the radio station they were on to broadcast their games. Usually it's supposed to be the other way around.
Right, yeah.
They were beyond irrelevant, called one of the worst franchises in all the sports. And then here they are on the stage. This is when that day was when the Blackhawks became a relevant franchise again. And for someone that went through all that stuff and would get laughed at wearing a Blackhawks jersey, and to have that was just like, it made all that, going through all that period, worth it. And this was just the tip of the iceberg, because many more great things happened after that. But that was the day where it was like, Blackhawks hockey is important again.
It's back and it's relevant.
People care about it. That was such a fun day.
Well, and that was the second ever Winter Classic. That's when it was, build up as like this big marquee NHL event in the middle of the year.
The first one in a baseball stadium. At Wrigley Field.
To do it at Wrigley, I mean, the jersey matchup was pretty darn nice. Detroit had some good ones. Blackhawk, I mean, I loved what they wore that year.
Yeah, it was great.
The aesthetics of the game was incredible. And they lose, but even still, like, it's just that the Blackhawks were in that game, and you get the eyes on that team again. Like, that was, like you guys said, like that kind of like that stamp of like, this team is something to pay attention to. And that was a young Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. All those guys were like ascending into stardom at that time.
We also learned a couple years later that was the game where Chris Chelios, who was playing for Detroit at the time, obviously, growing up a Cub fan, growing up in Chicago, wants to play. So Jim Nill and Ken Holland of the Red Wings pressure Mike Babcock to play him.
He was going to get scratched.
Yes. He plays him one shift to start the game, then benches Chelios the rest of the game. Chelios proceeds to drink some beers on the bench, and then they want to put him in with a minute left on a penalty kill. He says, "Go F yourself. I'm not doing that. I'm half in the bag. I'm loading." So another great
story.
Mike Babcock story. Boy, is he beloved by so many. What a guy.
My favorite story of that game was in the crowd. A lot of like Red Wing fans there, obviously. So of course you get the Detroit sucks chant, and there was always one guy in my section that like added on something at the very end. We're like, Detroit sucks, and then 10 seconds later, Bob Seger sucks too. Like every time it was something different. It was great. Kept the spirits high despite not a very good outcome.
I will continue with the list here in a moment on the CHGO Blackhawks podcast.
But first, we want to tell you about our pal Ray, not the guy for your eyeballs, but the guy for your automobile needs. Make Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram your number one pick this summer to find the perfect new car for you. This July, shop a wider selections of vehicle at Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, and score new lower prices across their huge inventory during the Make This the Summer event. For a limited time, lease the new 2024 Jeep Compass Latitude Luxe for $189 a month, or shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. Let the amazing team at Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram help you land the perfect vehicle at the perfect price, because at Ray's Price Promise, the numbers you're hearing now are the same prices you can expect to shop in-store and online. That's because Ray's Price Promise means no price changing, no add-ons, and absolutely no hidden fees, since they prioritize affordability for their customers. Hurry in the Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram today and shop one of Chicago's largest inventories, then drive home with more money in your pocket than you expect. So if you beautiful people, you are in the market for a new vehicle, then you have to check out the team at Ray Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, because they're the only team we recommend. Visit them today on Route 12 in Fox Lake. For more information, head on over to raycdjr.com, serving the community since 1963.
You know what I did today, fellas, before I came here?
What did you do?
I had therapy.
Oh, nice.
It was wonderful. I needed it. I still have no power in my house. I learned yesterday there was a tornado about 18 feet from my back door earlier this week. So
isn't that a CCR song?
A tornado at my back door, 18 feet away.
It
should be. If it's not, it will be soon.
My back door.
But you know, when life goes fast, whether it's literally 100-mile-an-hour winds blowing by your house, or just it's hard to catch up, it's important to take a moment to celebrate your wins and make adjustments. Therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. I love going to therapy. It is the best day of the week, and with BetterHelp, you can make it the best day of your week too. If you're thinking of starting therapy, first of all, do it. Second of all, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire that gets matched with a licensed therapist. And if you don't love that therapist, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take a moment, visit betterhelp.com/CHGO today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/CHGO. Do it for yourself. Do it for the people you care about. Therapy is wonderful.
100%.
All right, now we move to number 6 on the list. Oh, what a moment this was. The heartbreaker goal, June 8th, 2013. Patrick Kane completes the hat trick with a series-clinching goal in double overtime. After his game-winning goal, Kane introduces us to the heartbreaker, and the Blackhawks advance to the Stanley Cup final for the second time in 4 years. And a lost piece of this was the incredible pass from Jonathan Taves on this goal. Just right on the tape. Little bit of a saucer pass, just beautiful, well completed, well executed, and a great moment for those two to share together forever.
Yeah, and what I love about this game and the play, the overtime winner, is that, you know, Bryan Bickell made some pretty nice money off of that 2013 Cup run. He's the one that breaks up the play in the defensive zone for the Blackhawks to start the breakout going the opposite way, and then Taves and Kane complete it. But you know, a great play by Bickell, one of the underrated plays of that run that he had, where it was like 10 goals, something like that, like in that postseason. 2
assists in that game too.
Yeah, he was that was the best version of Bryan Bickell we ever saw, was that 2013 playoff
$16 million.
run. Good for him. And then I mean, just an incredible game, and I remember. I'll always remember this game because this was, 2013. My wife was working at the time as she was working at a daycare in the West Loop, and one of the families wanted to have her babysit their kid, and so went with her, dropped her off at where they lived, and nearby was a bar that I was going to go and watch the game at. So she was babysitting. I was, watching the game. Gets later in the game, goes into overtime and everything, and the parents that she was babysitting for come into the bar and are like, "Hey, what you doing? Fun to see you here." So I ended up watching the rest of the game with them, having some pizza and some beers, and they were like, "Oh, should we have Catherine come over too? The kids are asleep." And I was like, that seems a little irresponsible. Just leave your children asleep alone.
I saw a Law and Order episode that started that way.
But yeah, watching that game, and then Kane scores. Everyone goes nuts. They go on to the Cup final and win.
It was another game I was fortunate enough to be in attendance to, having the season tickets through that era, and just when you talked about that play Bickell made, and when it started the rush going the other way, you knew it was over. Like, the crowd just got up to its
with
feet,
Taze and Kane.
It was like, that's it, series over, on to the final again. And and that was that ridiculous 2013 year where it was just like you never doubted this team. Like, after that, after about 15, 16 games into that crazy start to the season, you're like, this team's a juggernaut.
Yeah, they're
like,
so freaking good.
They came at you in waves, and that game was really never that series. No series in that playoff run outside of one, which we'll get to in a moment, really ever felt in doubt. And even that one didn't feel in doubt for as long as it should have. Like,
right.
But that series was like, once they got to the cup, the conference finals against the Kings, who were the defending Stanley Cup champs. Mm-hmm. You knew they were dead on the water. Like, this team had no chance.
Right.
And then they dispatched them in 5 games. But that, you just knew everybody in the United Center, as soon as that puck started going the other way with 88 and 19, it was like, all right, time to celebrate. This game is over.
Good luck to you. As we enter the top 5, I want to remind you that CHGO Ranks content series is presented by our friends at Miller Lite. We're discussing the top 10 Chicago Blackhawks games of all time. So let's move to number 5 here on our list. Number 5 is, of course,
Game 5.
Game 5 against Nashville. Fitting that Nashville Game 5 is number 5. April 24th, 2010.
They scored 5 goals.
The Hawks blow a 2-goal second period lead. Patrick Kane's shorthanded goal ties the game with 14 seconds left. Then Marian Hossa comes out after a major boarding penalty, 10 seconds in, and scores the winner. Hawks win 5-4, and that's it. That was still kind of surprised it finished this low, but there were a lot of really great moments, like that were cup wins and stuff. When you ask Hawks fans about memorable games, this is almost always one of the top answers you're going to get.
Yeah, this and our number 4 game, if you say like not cup winning games, what's the best ones? It's a 50-50 split usually. And this one it's one of those crazy, like, butterfly effect kind of moments where it's just like, if they don't win this game, what happens? Because then you go down 3-2 in the series going to Nashville. This is before you've had all those, playoff runs and those moments through the regular seasons of, 2013 and 14 and 15, where it was just like cemented that, you never count the Blackhawks out. But if they don't win this game, maybe that seed of doubt gets in and they don't advance past Nashville, and who knows, maybe everything gets blown up and you don't even have one cup to show for it, let alone.
Totally different.
I mean, you had a salary cap crunch that summer.
Yeah, it was coming.
You had to get
one way or another.
Bufflin was gone, and Niemi only lasted that year, and you had to make the decision on Jarmo. Like, so many things could have changed.
But the other thing too, though, is like, if the Hawks don't win the cup, the Sharks probably don't offer sheet Hjalmarsson, right?
Right. Bufflin doesn't
command as much money. Bufflin doesn't make as much money.
Yeah.
Niemi doesn't become such a costly priority. Like, look at what we've seen teams do, like really talented championship caliber teams do, especially in the new playoff format. After a first or second round loss, they completely freak out. They are like, we need to make changes. Sometimes your team's good enough, they just fall short.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but the converse of that is what Toronto's doing, and they just keep running it back and back and back and back and back, hoping that the core is going to do it. It's a tough balance, but you see teams make massive changes after first round unexpected exits, and that very much could have been the case if the Hawks lost that series in Nashville.
Yeah.
I remember being up. This was an afternoon game. It was during the day. It was on NBC, so we had the great Doc Emmerich making all those calls, and I remember the Hawks being down. It was like the last TV timeout of the third period, and I remember we turned to the guys that sat in the row behind us that were season ticket holders too, and we were like, well, if they don't make it back from Nashville, have a good summer. Like, we were shaking hands saying, I guess we'll see you in October. Looks like this might be over. We had no idea what was going to happen. And then a couple minutes later, Hossa takes a penalty, and you're like, oh, this. And then, Patrick Kane gets the shorthanded goal. It's technically shorthanded, but they had the goalie pulled. And then
only one of his career.
Martin Erat makes one of the best contributions to Blackhawks history. And my favorite moment, if you watch, if you go on YouTube and you watch the official highlights of that goal, and they show the replay of the goal from like
a wide angle,
the back end,
you
see on his way to celebrating the goal, Brent Sopel just cross checks Martin. I believe it's Martin Erat. Just gets him from behind and then jumps into the pile. That's my favorite moment. I mean, the Hossa celebration is iconic. On the knees.
When you never saw that from him.
No. Well, because he probably was like, I might have just cost us our season.
Yeah.
To then instantly, he went from goat to hero in literally 10 seconds. Because even when they scored in regulation, and then you go to that, the place is going crazy, and then you got a 17-minute intermission before overtime. After about like 4 or 5 minutes calming down, you sat down and you realized, shit. The Nashville Predators have 4.5 minutes of a power play to start overtime. This could still be bad.
Does anyone remember back in the day, Dale Talon, when he was broadcasting with Pat Foley, always used to say that it felt like power plays to begin a period never scored. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if his reasoning was like that just the two teams were too rested, or you kind of lose the momentum of the power play. When you take the intermission break, you got to start the period back up a little bit. You got time
to, as a defensive team, to kind of
rest and
maybe watch a little video and go, hey, this is probably what they're going to try and do. Watch out for it.
Yeah, I definitely thought of that in that moment of like, well, Dale Talon always says like when you're trying
I don't think he was talking about 4 minute and 38 second power play.
I know. But you got to, in moments of stress, you've got to find your way to get through it. I'm going to be honest. I did not have this game on my list, and I know I'm going to catch some shit for that, and maybe rightfully so.
Oh, it's your guy.
Here's why. The game itself sucked. It was an absolute slog. It was boring aside from obviously the conclusion.
Except for the 9 goals.
But but it was just a boring ass, like, maybe because the Hawks were playing poorly.
It was a Predators game.
And it was very much a Barry Trotz Predators game where you're like, everything is impossible in this game. It was a difficult watch, and when you're it's not entertaining, but you're stressed, it is the worst combination.
Oh yeah.
Because all you want is some sort of sign of how things are going to go. Usually in a normal game, not against a Barry Trotz team, you could say, like, this team is playing better, so I feel after 60 minutes or whatever, they'll win. You couldn't get any sort of feel for who was the better team in that game, and you knew the Hawks were the better team. On paper, they were significantly better.
Right.
But it was like, when is this going to show itself? Mm-hmm. And it was starting to feel, like you said, like late. Like, oh, man, like they might not be as good as we thought they were, and this could be over if they don't win this. And then the despair sets in. So all of these things, like, kind of pepper your memories of this game, because the moment was phenomenal. The Kane goal, the Hossa goal, all amazing and historic, but the rest of the game was absolutely boring. The other reason too I cut it out is because I want to get some more non-dynasty moments on the list.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
There was a team before 2009, believe it or not.
Yeah, well, we had a couple of them there.
I know.
We got a bunch in our honorable mention.
Yeah.
It was tough in this list to like go back, but it's just like experiencing these things, compared to, hey, remember 1934?
Right.
I mean, but actually living through it and being at some of these games, it's just like there's no way you can keep them off the list.
Yeah, and to that point of like, the game wasn't great except for the finale. Like, I don't know. I feel like in conversations we had leading up to this CHGO ranks, week and with all these games, not even, our Blackhawks games, but all the games, is I still come back to sometimes games just come down to moments and what you remember. And yeah, I mean, this is obviously one of those where it was just like, that is such a monumental moment that you say Nashville Game 5, every Blackhawks fan knows exactly what you're talking about. So for as much as some games might actually kind of stink when you go back and watch the full entirety of it up until the finish, like it still makes that impact.
It's a huge moment. There's no doubt about it. All right, we're going to head to the break zone here in a second, but we're going to have our top 4 and then the honorable mention on the other side of this break.
Yeah. And hey, when you're celebrating overtime wins, whether it's in Game 5 against Nashville in 2010 or in the present day, you should always reach for your favorite celebratory beverage, and ours for today is Miller Lite. Sometimes things need to change. One thing that doesn't, though, is the great taste of Miller Lite. It was the original light beer, like the Blackhawks were in the original 6, but to this day, it is still the best one, just like the Blackhawks. Miller Lite has more of the taste that you want and less of the stuff that you don't. And speaking of that Winter Classic in 2009, one of my fond memories of watching that game is covering up the hangover that I was experiencing when I was watching the game at my parents' place.
There you go.
Which was, hey,
seeing a theme here.
A fun time. Yeah, well, 2009 Mario was a little bit different.
BetterHelp.com.
What was never different was the great taste of Miller Lite. And hey, no matter how your team changes, you can always enjoy the great taste of Miller Lite. Tastes like Miller Lite. Tastes like Miller Lite. You can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories per 12 ounces of the great Miller Lite.
And what goes well with beer is everything, but especially grilling. Especially grilling pork. People who are active need more protein than your average American. In fact, our friends at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, our enemies at the Dietitians of Canada, no, I'm just kidding, and the American College of Sports Medicine recommend 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for athletes, depending on training. So for a 150-pound person, that's about 81 to 136 grams of protein per day. 1 3-ounce serving of pork provides 23 grams of high-quality protein that can help active individuals build and preserve muscle. That's like a pork slider.
Nice.
We'll get a bunch of those. You'll cover yourself. The International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends that people who are involved in a general fitness program or are interested in optimizing their health eat low-fat, high-quality sources of protein. That includes lean cuts of pork. Elevate your protein game with lean pork. It's a powerhouse of natural goodness. Savor the flavor, savor the gains, and celebrate any occasion by enjoying the best pork produced by Illinois pig farmers. From your sausage and bacon for breakfast to pulled pork or juicy chops hot off the grill, it's an entire season dedicated to pork and the people behind the product, paid for by the Illinois pork producers. Generations of commitment. This is the CHGO Ranks content series presented by Miller Lite. We're discussing the top 10 Chicago Blackhawks games of all time. And here we go with number 4 and one of my favorite moments in sports history. May 29th, 2013, Brent Seabrook sends the Red Wings packing with a 2-1 overtime win. Nicholas Hjalmarsson's goal gets waved off with 1:39 left to play on a bullcrap penalty call on an incidental contact behind the play. Stupid. Anyway, Brent Seabrook wins the game and the series in overtime. The Blackhawks complete a 3-1 series comeback, sending the Red Wings to the Eastern Conference, crying about time zones with a soul-crushing loss. And not only do they go to the Eastern Conference, the Blackhawks send Detroit into obscurity.
Yeah, they haven't been to the
in a
playoffs
decade
since.
of ass.
They haven't
Their greatest hits album, Decade
they
of
made
Ass.
the playoffs the next year.
Did they?
Yeah.
Who cares? It was in the Eastern Conference. Nobody watches that garbage conference anyway. Yeah, this was an amazing, amazing game. Again, another one I was very fortunate enough to be there. But, this was – I remember going to Game 5 when the Hawks were down 3-1, and you were just like, all right, we're not going to shake hands in our building. It's not going to happen tonight. And that was, you know, they won that game 4-1 to take the series back to Detroit. 2 power play goals in the second period kind of put that one out of reach. Andrew Shaw had 2 goals in that game. And then game 6, you know, that was the Michael Frolik penalty shot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a back and forth game until the third period when the Hawks scored 3 straight goals before the period was even half over. And you were like, all right, here we go. Detroit got a goal in the last minute of the game to make it closer. But then you get into this game and it was
tense.
It was nerve-wracking. Patrick Sharp scored like a minute into the second period to get the game score, and then it was Honk Zonkerberg, Henrik Zetterberg scores like 20-something seconds into the third period, and you're like, oh, come on. And, of course, the Jarmelson controversy. I remember being there, and he scores the goal, and everybody's going nuts. And then I was looking down because he was pretty much like right where
not celebrating.
Where I saw him almost like launch his stick at the ref. I was like, wait a minute,
comes the putter throw.
Something's not right. And the worst part about it is they never really explained it in the United Center. So it was kind of like, well, okay, there was a penalty behind the play, but it's also like what
and nothing to do with the play.
Yeah, no,
nothing.
And it should have never been incidental penalties anyway because Brendan Saad got tackled. Was it Justin Albucator?
Kyle Quincy.
Quincy.
Yeah, Blackhawks legend.
That bum. Brendan Saad got 2 minutes for allowing himself to be tackled on the way to the bench, essentially. So it was just awful call. Yeah. But, of course, Brent Seabrook with another one of those huge overtime goals. The assists to Dave Bolland and Michael Frolik. I mean, again,
Dave Bolland just destroying Gustav Tarquist.
Gustav Tarquist. I don't even know which one it actually is.
It was Nyquist. It was Nyquist.
Because they were both on that team, both of those guys.
Were they?
I think
might have been, yeah.
Correction, Kyle Quincy, not a Blackhawks legend. I was thinking of Kyle Comiskey.
Ah, right.
Oh, Kyle
confused me when you said that.
Well, and Dan Cleary, too, was a longtime Red Wing that was a one-time Blackhawk.
Yes. Tatar was not on that team, but they eventually became teammates together.
For a little bit, yeah. But, yeah, Bolland makes that play. And then, yes, it's so funny that it's just like, it wasn't even like a snipe. Like, it was just like, it was a really,
knuckleball.
It was a good shot that I think I still to this day can't really tell off of like any of the angles if it hit. I think it was Cronwall was the defender on the play. If it hit his skate on the way and got past Jimmy Howard, or if he just was screened and it got past him, it doesn't really matter in the end because it got past him anyway. Right. And yeah, I mean, just a huge moment, like the stamp on that rivalry at its final like peak moment. It was just awesome, and you can see, you know, the all the emotion in Seabrook after he scores. I love the camera angle of him in the dog pile, just like I love
such a great moment.
Yeah. Yep, that was definitely. I mean, that is, spoiler alert, the best game of all time that didn't involve a Stanley Cup victory. For so many reasons.
I just remember that day. Like, that was back when I was doing the post-game shows after the midday show. So I had just hours to kill from one show ending to the next one, to the post-game. I would just pace around downtown. I just was like walking the streets. I just was a lost soul. I was so nervous, and it was just, it's Detroit, and they were down 3-1, and they got it this far, but do they have enough to come back? And you're feeling that way the whole game. I don't know if I sat the entire game.
Oh, yeah.
That game was just nerve-wracking. And then you think it's over, or at least, Hjalmarsson scores, and you're going crazy. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? What happened? Oh, my God.
Yeah, now you have to go to overtime. And
And now, like, kind of looking back on it, it's kind of similar to the 2016 Cubs. Like, they're in control of that game. Then all of a sudden, they're not. Then the rain comes. You're like, they're the Cubs. They're never going to bounce back from this.
Right, yeah.
And then they overcome it and prove why they were the best team.
It was satisfying because all those years, Blackhawk fans had to sit there and take it from Red Wing fans.
Oh yeah,
and even when they won the cup in 2010, I was like, well, you still didn't beat us.
Right.
You didn't beat us. Well,
And they did.
pack your bags, move to the inferior conference, and shut your mouths.
yeah.
The Red
And for
Wings-
those that don't know, this is a little history lesson for you young Blackhawks fans out there. Bill Wirtz used to sell group tickets to Detroit travel groups to come to Hawks games before he would open them up to Chicago, because he knew he would sell more tickets.
It was the only 2 sellouts of the season at the United
Yes.
Center.
So you would have, in the really, really dark days, like the mid-2000s, you would have more Red Wings than Hawks fans, and it would be a sellout.
Yeah.
It would be like a Hawks. It would be like a Hawks game against Nashville back in the day.
A lot of the traffic coming from the western burbs of all those Michigan transplants living in whatever Downers Grove and
Michigan
Naperville.
implants. It's full of like cherries.
Full of
and-
cherries. Yeah.
used car parts.
Yeah, there you go. Right, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, you would have more. There were more Red Wing fans at Blackhawks games for a long time, so
Yeah,
that made it more satisfying.
And what was frustrating is, as a fan, you're pissed because you're one of the 2,700 Hawks fans out of the 21,000 there, and you want them gone, and they're loud, and you can't drown them out, and of course you're getting your ass kicked for 60 minutes, and it's the most frustrating experience to go to a game like that. So screw those guys forever. Goodbye.
Detroit sucks.
Thank you.
Detroit sucks.
Last time we have to talk about them today.
Yes.
Red
All right,
Wings-
before we get to the top 3, we're going to do a like spike here. 3, 2, 1. Spike that like button for us. Elbow smash it, leg drop it, give it a perfect plex. Figure 4 leg lock, shake, rattle, and roll. What else we got? Sweet chin music,
Frog splash.
frog splash, the Bam Bam Bigelow flying headbutt,
Mhm.
Yokozuna Banzai drop. Don't do that. You're going to break your computer if you do that. But, just hit it. That's all that matters. Hit that like button for us as we move into the top 3 here on the CHGO Ranks content series presented by Miller Lite. Number 3, 17 seconds. June 24th, 2013. Bryan Bickell and Dave Bolland score 17 seconds apart. Jonathan Taves has a goal and an assist, and the Blackhawks win their 5th Stanley Cup, winning the game 3-2. We talked about this image earlier. Dave Bolland throwing the gloves off. Just can't wait to celebrate. And I'm glad with so many Hawks of the dynasty like getting their moments. Bufflin had his moments. Hossa had his moment. Taves, Kane, all these guys had their moments. Dave Bolland finally got his that was not pissing somebody off.
Yeah.
Right.
got one when it mattered most. And I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous finishes to a game, not just for the Blackhawks, but in all of sports, to have in a clinching scenario, 2 goals, 17 seconds apart, to essentially steal the cup away from the Boston Bruins, a Boston Bruins team that 2 years prior had won the cup themselves. Like this was prime era Bruins,
Yep.
and you're staring down a game 7. You would have gone back to Chicago, but it's a game that you don't want to have to play if you don't have to. And luckily for the Blackhawks in their 3 modern dynasty runs, never had to play a Stanley Cup game 7. And 17 seconds is why they didn't have to do it in 2013.
I've told this story before, but I was in Boston for that Cup final, but I wasn't in the building. I was standing by at a Boston radio station to go live during the postgame show, and I could see the Boston host for the other station like through the glass. He's wearing a Bruins jersey, watching the game. I'm watching the Hawks game. We both know why we're there, right? And he's like getting pumped up. Bruins are winning.
Yeah.
And then 17 seconds happen. And I just like, I'm just going to play it cool. I am like dying on the inside, but I'm just going to be like, totally expected.
Oh yeah,
Let's go. This is what the Blackhawks do.
Calm, cool.
We knew this was
collected.
coming all along. We act like we've been here before, but inside it was just turmoil. Then, well, it's a different story for a different day. But lost our connection, and I was interviewing John McDonough on one phone and talking to a Boston engineer on the other phone. Hey, congratulations! Get us back on the air. What the hell's going on?
Oh my god,
It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Good old radio.
I remember we went to the same exact bar we went to for the 2010 game.
Good job.
We got there early. We got the same table. We wanted we can't change anything.
Yeah.
And Bickell scores that goal, and you want to talk about amazing facial expressions after a goal. He was ready to just jump through a brick wall, and
missing his front teeth.
It was so cool. And Taves made just an amazing pass.
Great pass.
Where Bickell, all he had to do was just get a stick on the ice, and the game was tied. And everybody's going crazy. Where I think everybody where we were at thought the Bolland goal was a replay of the Bickell goal.
Yeah, it was so quick.
And I was like, no, wait a minute, that's live. They just scored again. And people were shocked for a second or two, and then got into it. It was just crazy.
I think in real time, it was 17 seconds of clock time, but I think in real time it was 2 minutes and 30 seconds or something.
Yeah, from pulling the goalie, from pulling Corey Crawford to basically the puck drop after the game, what was the game-winning goal is 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
Yeah.
It's in real time. It's crazy.
One final thing about this game is you can check it out on YouTube when you're done watching this. Somebody put together a clip of a bar in Chicago and a bar in Boston for the entire
was the Pony,
game.
I think.
Yeah. And just to see the reactions at the same time of both fan bases is awesome. That was
watching. It's cry themselves asleep in their giant Duncans.
This was one of those games that even if you played it on NHL 24, you wouldn't believe it happened.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. All right.
Number 2.
We move on to number 2. June 15th, 2015. The Blackhawks clinched the Stanley Cup on home ice. Duncan Keith breaks a scoreless tie late in the second period. Corey Crawford makes 25 saves in the shutout win. 2-0 win over the Lightning. The Blackhawks win their 6th Stanley Cup, first on home ice since 1938.
Talk about memories of this game. You were saying in 2013 you went to the same bar that you went to for 2010. Well, in 2015 we did the same thing. We said we were gonna go to the same place that we saw the potential clinching game in 2013. We're gonna go to the same one in 2015. It is the now closed Pitchfork Saloon that was on Irving Park Road.
Yeah, I remember that place.
Here in town. And if you'll remember that night was a monsoon storm, rainstorm. And I took the train into the city, and I was just like, I'm not going to, try and get a cab, or I don't think really Ubers were that popular in 2015, if I remember. So I was like, I'll just walk from the train stop to the bar. It's not that far. Skies open, and I'm in my Blackhawks jersey sprinting through the rain. I was just I was getting soaked. And I always remember between the train stop and the bar, right in the middle was my wife's old apartment. And it was a garden apartment. So they weren't living there at that time, but I was like, I know where that apartment is. I'm just going to go and run under the steps by that front door. So apologies if I scared anybody that day, but I just ran under, and I was like, okay, I need a breather from being soaked in the rain. Got there, I got to the bar, it was drenched, and then watched the game, and luckily they won, so it was all worth it.
I remember getting pictures from home and just my daughter out banging pots and pans, but it's pouring rain. I'm like, get her inside.
No,
electrocuted.
Nothing wrong with metal pots out in the rain.
This was when my mom she had a ticket rep that she was pals with, and she would get tickets in the handicap, the ADA sections for one game around. And every time she got that upgrade, she would, switch between, my sister and I would get to go, and I got to go to this game. Even though I had the season tickets, I took the upgrade of the seats, but it was such a cool moment to take my mom to that game. My parents, one of their first dates before they even got married was a Blackhawks game. They had season tickets the first few years of their marriage. My dad was stationed in Virginia in boot camp for the 1971 final, and they remember, my mom would tell me stories of they would get in the car and drive around until the AM radio station come in, and they'd pull over and stop so they could listen to those games.
Yep.
And my dad had passed away in 2012, and right before the game, we got my mom this little necklace. It looked like a crystal, but you could open the crystal, and we put some of my dad's ashes in it.
Oh, cool.
And took him to that game.
And nice.
Just awesome. A special night. And then, Duncan Keith scores that goal in the middle of the late second period. I had never heard that stadium louder than it was then. And then, Kaner puts it away late in the third. Brad Richards had the assists on both of those goals.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the most underrated pickups
was.
of the Dynasty era.
One season
he was
wonder.
so good on that second line.
Perfect
Especially when him and Versteeg were going early in the season. They were so good together. But yeah, Brad Richards getting to play with Patrick Kane in a cup-clinching final game, like against his former team. So, who he won a cup with. So,
Conn Smythe too, wasn't he?
yeah, I believe that is true.
Yeah.
And but just such a special night. And then having the cup on the ice, it was delayed a few minutes because of the weather.
Caught in the rain.
But just so cool to be in the building for that. That was kind of the culmination of like all those years of being a season ticket holder, was seeing him win it on home ice, and it was like, I don't need to see anything else again. And
well, you haven't.
Right. It hasn't been
Yet.
much. I mean, that was their last playoff series win, not counting the bubble.
Not counting the bubble, right?
Bubble fake playoff series.
Brad Richards had 37 points in 76 games in a regular season. In the playoffs, he had 14 points in 23. 3 goals, 11 assists. He was really good for the Hawks.
Came
in the
up
playoffs.
when it mattered, yeah.
And another one of those perfect complementary pieces brought in. Back when he was shall not be named,
Had a clue.
Had a clue.
Best $700 ever spent was going to that game.
Nice.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
And Brad Richards and Patrick Sharp brought the Stanley Cup by the studios for us a couple days later. That's pretty cool.
Nice.
Showed up in the big unmarked black SUV, and out comes Brad Richards with the cup. Like,
Can't wait till
sweet.
they do it again here in a few years, and then we can have a show with it right there in front of us.
That'd be
yes,
cool.
that would be great.
And we would
That'd
just
be
sit
cool.
there and stare at it for an hour and not say a
We'll
word.
put the Miller Lite in it.
Yeah, we'll drink some brewskis out of it. All right, number 1 on the list. I think you probably know the answer by now.
No doubts.
Who could forget? June 9th, 2010, the Blackhawks Stanley Cup drought ends. The Flyers tied the game with 3:59 left in regulation. Patrick Kane scores from a crazy angle in overtime. No one knows if it's in, aside from, I think, Patrick Kane and Brent Sobel seem to be the two that knew.
Patrick Sharp.
Patrick Sharp, too. Yeah, he knew, too.
If you go back and watch the TV angle broadcast of it, Kane goes around after he scores, and Sharp is like the only one
He's
chasing him, and
undressing.
everyone else is like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, that's the first Hawks Cup in 49 years, a 4-3 win. I always remember, too, the celebration. No one's really sure. Jonathan Taves is in the scrum, and he's like looking over his shoulder,
Yeah.
like, am I okay to celebrate? As someone who's such a traditionalist
Is it a
like
goal?
Taves, didn't want to celebrate prematurely. But Kane knew it was in, and boy, it's just such a weird that a game would end after so many years without a cup, that it would end on such a strange and unsatisfying way.
Yeah.
And I know Doc Emmerich still kind of beats himself up over that.
Yeah, the call. Well, he got a redemption a few years ago. I remember they redid that.
Yeah.
Did that, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those moments where it kind of bridged that gap in generation of Blackhawks fans, I would say, because that team was that like new era of brought a lot of new fans in to the Blackhawks world, and then you have that generation that grew up with the Hull and Makita and Esposito era and everything. Speaking from personal experience, that was like me and my dad, and we were watching that game. It's just it's one of those moments that you don't forget because of how crazy it was, the significance of everything. I remember watching that game and just like the guys on the ice, my family, we had no idea what was going on. But then as soon as, you see the replay, you see the puck cross the line, we were just running around the house, like going crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I think this is number 1 on our list, not just because of the 49-year drought ending and the way that game ended, but that was a really good game. It was
an
back
awesome
and forth.
series.
really good.
Yeah,
game. Great
I
series.
The Hawks get a power play goal by Dustin Byfuglien late in the first period, but then Scott Hartnell scores in the final minute on the power play.
He was so good in that series.
You know
too.
who else had a crazy series? and then got way overpaid by the Red Wings. Haha, suck. Remember Ville Leno? And
I
the
do remember
crazy
Ville Leno, yes.
playoffs he had. He had a couple assists in this game. The current GM, Danny Briere, scored.
I remember Simone Gagne being big for that team, too.
That's a guy I always thought would be a Hawk, Simone Gagne.
But then Sharp and Ladd score in the second half of the second period, and they're up 3-2. It's looking good. Then Hartnell again. And I remember just hating Scott Hartnell in that series.
Effing good that series. So good,
yeah.
so good.
They
so
had
good.
What made it more annoying is just the beard and the hair looking like Yukon Cornelius while doing it.
I can't remember which game it was, but he had an unbelievable blind behind the back pass right in front of the net on the it was just stop.
Was that either game 1 or was it this game? Might have been. I feel like it might have been this game, like on the Flyers tying goal, or did he score the tying goal?
No, he scored.
He
scored the tying goal.
Okay,
so it would have been Leno.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like I do remember that play that he made. But yeah,
he was an exhausting guy to play against because he was just so good. He's really good for a short. He was a good player, but it was great for like 3 or 4 years and a perfect kind of a playoff player. All right, before we wrap up, let's do some of our honorable mentions.
I mean, there were a ton of games that we could have.
we
could have added. It was really so tough.
Yeah.
But here's some of the ones we put on. May 9th, 1985 versus the Edmonton Oilers. Why is that on the list? Well, not only did the Blackhawks win a playoff game against the vaunted 80s Oilers, but that was the first game that Blackhawk fans cheered during the national anthem. Yep. That's when the tradition started. The first 2 games of that series were in Edmonton. Mm-hmm. You can't really find the full story. There is a story allegedly Oilers fans booed during the U.S. anthem, so that's why they started cheering. That's unconfirmed. That's more urban legend. But I think it was more of just like, hey, we're down. Yeah, we're down 2-0 in the series. You know, let's get our team hyped up, have some pride, and it's been a tradition ever since.
That's awesome.
Then we got March 23rd, 52 versus the Rangers. That is when Bill Moisienko
hat trick,
21 seconds. He scored a hat trick in 21 seconds. And he almost had a 4th goal. He hit the post, which would have given him 4 goals in 45 seconds.
Oh, my God.
So
that's insane.
Fastest hat trick in NHL history.
What's wrong with you, Moisienko? Get it done.
Insane.
Probably never going to be broken, I don't think.
I wouldn't think so.
I don't think so.
Then we have May 18th, 1971, the Blackhawks lose Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final to the Montreal Canadiens. Blackhawks had a 2-0 lead in that game early in the first period and ended up losing. Henry Richard scores 2 goals, including the winner.
He's pretty good, I hear.
Heard of him.
That game just had so much Hall of Fame talent.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about, Hull and Makita, Tony Esposito, Ken Dryden, Billy Vo, like so many guys, like hockey legends in that game. I know it was a loss. This one always stuck in my mind because, again, my parents always talked about that game, and that's why I grew up hating the Montreal Canadiens because of this game. But it's a legendary game. I mean, anybody that was a fan at that time remembers that game and the disappointment. Not every great game has to be a win, I guess.
I like it better that way, though.
I mean, yes, it helps.
Next up, April 23rd, 1994 versus the Maple Leafs. Tony Amonte had 4 goals in Game 3 against the Leafs. This was the final playoff series in Chicago Stadium history. Toronto won the series in 6 games, but that was like Tony Amonte announcing his arrival, and this is right when I was really starting to get into the Hawks. So, a 4-goal game kind of lost to history. Didn't help they didn't win the series, but significant in that it was the last playoff series at Chicago Stadium.
And that game and then the game after were the final 2
wins at Chicago.
Wins. Yep.
And then our last honorable mention is May 30th, 2015 against the Ducks. That was Game 7, 5-3 in Anaheim. Jonathan Toews scores 2 goals in the first period and just says, F you.
Yeah.
This is ours. And that, out of all the series in those 3 Cup runs, that was the only one that I ever really had doubt the Hawks weren't going to win.
That was a terrifying series.
They fell behind 3-2 in that series, and man, it felt like, okay, it's over because they had essentially 3.5 defensemen at that point.
Yeah.
Like all those long playoff runs seemed to be catching up to them. The Ducks were just
That
a
Ducks
forechecking machine. You know,
God.
that was the Ryan Kessler.
Yeah, no
Nobody
human
could,
can withstand this sort of.
Kessler, Getzlaff,
Getzlaff in his
Perry.
prime, Corey Perry in his prime.
Yeah, I mean, that was
They just
that was
had
a tough team.
They were so good, but Taves, you know, took that crowd out of that building immediately.
Yep.
They were up, I believe, they went up 5-1 before the Ducks.
They were up 4-0 at one point.
Yeah, and
I
then
remember
that 4-0, then 5-1, and then the Ducks got a couple goals late in the game, but at that point it was over. But that series, man, that was probably the toughest out of all of them.
And it was Tavo's first cup in Chicago.
But not
First
his,
of many.
but not his last.
Not his
Exactly
last.
right.
Yep.
We hope you enjoyed that. We're doing CHGO Ranks all week on CHGO Sports. Make sure you're following us on social media at CHGO_sports. Our show is CHGO_Blackhawks, and it's all presented by Miller Lite, the top 10 Chicago Blackhawks games of all time. Jump on our Twitter. Let us know what you thought of our list. What do we miss? What do we misrank? I think we got it perfect, though.
Yeah, there's
I
no,
think it's perfect.
nothing to complain about.
Yeah.
All right,
10
we're
out of
back
10.
tomorrow, Friday, 2:30, right here on the CHGO Blackhawks podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.